Okay, today we're going to discuss some really mind-blowing discoveries when it comes to archaeology. Because in this case, what if I told you that the infamous Kraken was not actually a myth? And instead, he was just a little bit late to the party. 100 million years late. Because in this video, we're going to discuss this extremely recent study that found incredible evidence of this. This is Nanaimoteuthis, a 19-meter or 62 feet long super predator that previously scientists believed could not possibly exist. Yet today we're going to discuss new evidence from the late Cretaceous period, approximately 100 to 72 million years ago, that almost definitively shows us that these things did exist and were possibly some of the largest predators in existence on the planet. In this case, so large and so scary that they potentially hunted everything else, including the infamous Mosasaurus, that scary creature from the Jurassic Park. And Mosasaurus is something my kids are obsessed with, because we actually have tons of toys at home. And so for a very long time, up until I guess recently, scientists assumed that the ancient oceans were exclusively ruled by these massive vertebrates, and technically massive reptilians, such as Mosasaurus, Plesiosaurus, and, more recently, megalodon sharks. However, this recent groundbreaking discovery revealed a previously unknown predator that's now the prime contender for the apex predator of this whole era. A giant octopus the size of a city bus. Nanaimoteuthis Haggarti. And so let's discuss exactly what this means for our understanding of the octopus and for our understanding of invertebrates, and of course discuss why this is such an incredible discovery, assuming of course it's all confirmed. And the thing is, one of the biggest problems in paleontology is that we usually find only what's left behind. And for vertebrates, it's generally pretty easy. They contain a lot of bones inside, and bones can preserve for a very long time. As a matter of fact, bones and teeth, because of their hardness, fossilize very well. But invertebrates like octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish are soft-bodied, and so they essentially leave almost nothing behind except for their beak. And because they're so soft, and also because a lot of them are very intelligent, sometimes they're also referred to as an intelligent goo. But because their bodies decompose extremely quickly, we don't really know much about their evolution and actually have a limited number of fossils from back in the days. And most of the fossils usually involve nautiloids, which do contain a shell. But despite being invertebrates, they are quite different from octopuses. And so it's really only the beak fossils, which are scientifically known as the chitinous jaws, that can usually preserve in fossils and can tell us just a little bit more about the octopus evolution. And well, just like modern octopuses, ancient species very likely also had these powerful beaks that were also made out of the same material, chitin. This is essentially the same stuff we have in our fingernails, but it's just a lot more dense. And so a typical octopus beak, in theory, can survive for millions of years. And that's in essence what the scientists from the Hokkaido University in Japan discovered extremely recently. But here they also used a new method referred to as digital fossil mining. Something that in essence does this. Instead of just cracking rocks open, which can usually destroy fragile specimens, here they used high-resolution grinding tomography, which involves sanding down the rock samples layer by layer, and then taking high-resolution images of each slice. And so once they've done this, they use the machine learning algorithm, referred to as the zero-shot learning, in order to process these massive datasets and reconstruct three-dimensional structures of the beaks discovered in the fossil. And so using this process, they managed to analyze 27 different fossils from Japan and from Vancouver Island, essentially discovering beaks from specimens of different sizes. And in the process, they discovered two specific species that seem to represent what's known as the finned octopus, belonging to the genus Nanaimoteuthis, in this case named after Nanaimo, one of the regions in Vancouver. And technically, Nanaimoteuthis haggarti was actually discovered back in 2008 and was already quite impressive, possibly up to 8 meters in length. But it was really this recent discovery of a new specimen, and technically a new species, that shocked everyone. Nanaimoteuthis Haggarti seemed to be at least 3 times as big. And so here, by using what's known as allometric scaling, or basically by comparing the sizes of various fossilized beaks to the body ratio of 12 modern octopuses, the team calculated that this particular species could reach the length of approximately 19 to 20 meters. And once again, to put that in perspective, this is almost twice as big as the giant squid, which is the largest living cephalopod known to us today, and is approximately 2 meters or 6 feet longer than the star of the Jurassic Park, Mosasaurus. Here's roughly how the sizes in this case compare. Which means that for at least a few million years during this period, this was essentially the apex predator on the entire planet. Although I guess technically in the oceans, because I highly doubt such a massive creature would be able to get outside of the water and somehow move around. But in this case, there's a lot of signs that this didn't just survive underwater, it potentially preyed upon some of the most massive creatures living at this time. In other words, there are actual signs that this was a top predator. And so I guess the question here is, how do we know that? How do we actually know this was not some kind of a peaceful scavenger? Well, the answer in this case is wear patterns. And that's something you see in this image. Here the fossil showed extensive chipping, scratching, and polishing, and in some species up to 10% of the jaw tip has been worn away. And this level of damage usually indicates what's known as durophagy. Basically an act of crushing hard prey. In other words, whatever they were eating had to be very hard and most likely involved bone. And so this is an almost definitive evidence that these octopuses were not just eating soft fish, they were using their powerful beaks to crack through shells or a lot of other mollusks, and most likely also hard bones of vertebrate prey. And so they very likely used their long flexible arms to seize large animals and dismantle them with these beaks. And this would not be so different from what giant squid do today when battling their biggest competitor, the sperm whale. Although technically in this relationship, usually the giant squid is actually the prey, although they can put up a fight and sometimes win the fight. As a matter of fact, here's a really cool picture that directly shows us the damage from one of these battles on the skin of a typical sperm whale. This is of course from the suckers, not from the beak. But perhaps one of the most exciting discoveries for scientists is actually in how some of these wear patterns seem to be different depending on the side. Or specifically, in some of the larger specimen, the right side of the jaw was actually a little bit more worn out than the left, which tells us a little bit more about the octopus's brain. And technically this is known as lateralization, unofficially known as handedness. In modern animals, this kind of behavioral asymmetry is usually a sign of a complex brain and advanced neural processing. It basically suggests that many of these ancient octopuses already possessed high intelligence we generally see in octopuses today. And this is actually something we discussed recently because it is comparable to vertebrate intelligence, with the overall octopus being just as smart as a typical dog or even a primate. And so this is a groundbreaking discovery, and I'm sure we're going to learn so much more in the next few months. But this also highlights the idea referred to as convergent evolution. And specifically, approximately 400 million years ago, vertebrates and cephalopods both developed jaws. And over time, both groups followed a somewhat similar strategy to eventually become apex predators. And one of the biggest strategies here was actually losing their armor. For example, for the early fish, or the early marine vertebrates, they used to be extremely heavily armored, containing a lot of plates outside. And fun fact, some of these plates, and the material they were made from, eventually turned into teeth. And another fun fact, because many of these plates contain a lot of neuronal connections in order to basically sense the environment around them, that's actually one of the main reasons why even today we still get toothaches. Or basically our teeth still have those same neuronal connections that a lot of these ancient fish had back in the days. Except that for them this was to sense the environment and was basically all over those plates and not just their teeth. But that's just a fun fact and has nothing to do with the octopuses. Because for the ancestors of octopuses, they also lost their outer shells and eventually internalized a lot of their important organs. And in this case, this trade-off, which involved giving up physical defense, instead provided speed, agility, and eventually a larger brain that was required to survive difficult environments. And we technically even see this today when comparing groups like octopuses to their cousins nautiluses. Nautiluses still have their external shells, and while their brains are still just as ancient as they used to be millions of years ago. Or basically their brains are not as developed. In contrast, octopuses have some of the most complex brains, and this allowed them to move to the very top of the food chain. Although knowing how smart this octopus was is of course not something we can establish right now. But before we finish this video, I wanted to just clarify a few things. Even though I technically refer to this as a Kraken, today we're pretty certain that a lot of the previous reports of Kraken from the 17th and 18th century were most likely inspired by the sightings of the giant squid, which would be a different species. This is a species referred to as Architeuthis. And while giant squids are certainly large, they're definitely smaller than this guy. And though here it might be easy to conclude that maybe, just maybe, these things didn't actually go extinct and potentially survived for 80 million years to eventually attack certain ships and possibly even drag sailors to their death, we also have to remember that there is literally zero evidence of any of this happening ever. Because all of these stories were just that. They were stories. Inspired by a lot of fisherman lore, mixed with brief observations of the giant squid and just not knowing exactly what they were looking at. But in this case, this discovery is also really important because it does change our understanding of ancient aquatic ecosystem. Because for decades, the narrative has been that vertebrates very likely ruled the top pyramid, whereas invertebrates were probably just a food source. But here we have direct evidence that this is not the case, and that there was at least one invertebrate that very likely competed with some of these giants and possibly even ate them. And at the same time, this also suggests that this particular body structure, and specifically the blueprint involving strong jaws, no armor, and lateralized behavior, seems to be a telltale blueprint for a high-intelligence apex predator. A winning strategy that seems to have evolved more than once. So there are quite a lot of really exciting discoveries from this one study. But on that note, once we discover something else, or once researchers reveal some other additional discoveries about this particular fossil, we'll come back and discuss this in some of the future videos. And since there's so much of Earth's history still trapped in a lot of different fossils, because scientists have discovered a new technique to analyze them, chances are there might be some more groundbreaking discoveries really soon. On that note, check out some of the previous videos in the description. Thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining a channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.